Hello everyone, my name is Jordy Struck. I am the founder, coach, and trainer at the English Business House, and today I would like to discuss with you blended learning. I will be discussing blended learning, specifically in the context of English second language teaching. I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Blended learning is a combination of face-to-face learning and also comprises a digital or online component. Unlike hybrid learning, this means that students will participate in both face-to-face classes and also have to do work on their own time outside of class using a platform of some sort, usually found online. In hybrid learning, a portion of the class is learning in the classroom or face-to-face, and another portion of the class would be participating solely online. Blended learning combines both the resources to be found online and face-to-face learning. In most blended learning courses, online materials will make up 25 to 50% of the class. This has been found to be very effective as it allows students to work with the material outside of class on their own time, and also if they have questions or require further clarification to check in with their classmates, their cohort, and also their teacher. Classes are very much like a traditional class in the sense that the student is receiving a formal in-person training and participates in classes on a regular schedule. However, part of the class or the class work is completed outside of the class using either an online resource or program. Really, from the literature that I've reviewed, the best form of a blended class is to have balance between the face-to-face component and the online component. Now, what does balance really mean? This means that the student, the individual or the group, feel as though they're learning just as much in the class setting as they are using the online materials and tools. Here I'd like to look a bit at the history of blended learning, a focus on what sort of exercises are provided or traditionally, and also look at how it's being implemented today. Of course, in 2021, the majority of English learning, studying, training is being done online through Zoom. At the beginning of 2020, there were still quite a few in-person or face-to-face classes that were provided, but with the onset of the pandemic, everything has shifted online, and we're actually seeing a huge surge in the offerings of online classes. Finally, I'd like to look at the future of blended learning and perhaps the incorporation of AI. So blended learning programs really started in the corporate world when companies were trying to provide trainings or mentorships or different forms of educational programs to their employees, but having them be able to do it on site partially and also on their own time. Now, there was a transition to higher education or more formalized scholastic education, and this received some critical reviews, specifically in the way the classes were designed and the materials they were using. There was a bit of worry at the time that moving traditional classes or face-to-face classes into a blended setting might not transition well and may affect student results and also their engagement with the material. Now, through a bit of trial and error, education systems, administrators were able to find that balance. And from the literature I reviewed, really the balance to be found was around the 25% online component with a 75% in-person engagement. However, it's not uncommon today to find courses where there are not formal lectures and they're completely held online. Now, traditionally in ESL, the focus has been on comprehension, exercises, fill in the blank exercises, pronunciation drills, and things such as that. And from my experience with ESL teaching and learning, I've found that the focus on these sort of activities is not really what it should be. Instead, I believe that providing robust explanations of grammatical points and providing exercises to complete through communication is actually the best form. The reason for this is that language acquisition requires a huge amount of output and of actual in-person or at least, online communication, oral communication. By having students complete exercises, tests, mini quizzes online, you're helping them work on their written and reading forms of communication. But when it comes to oral communication and being in person and having conversations, it does little to advance their progress. That's one of the reasons that with my blended learning curriculum plan, I'm hoping to help students move things forward on grammatical points and giving them tools to work in person. In such a system, they would get a point to work on or an idea and a concept, and then they would be able to use that knowledge in person in communication, which is much more useful for building oral communication. Today, there are a plethora of different forms of online ESL classes that exist. Many of them rely on professional platforms that allow students to do exercises and drills and provide teachers or trainers with a resume of their progress. As I stated before, these are very textbook style questions and exercises that don't provide very much in the way of a real communication form. Many classes are taking place on Zoom. A lot of people are using different apps on their phones to learn languages. There's a lot of progress in the blended language learning space right now. And really, as we look to the future, what people are trying to develop and design are AI programs that can actually substitute in-person communication with a learner. Now, having this in-person communication would really allow them to, practice their oral communication without relying on having somebody to work on it with. Now, this is okay for a second language situation where there are other people that the learner can speak with in their context. However, this works poorly for foreign language learners. Now, a foreign language learner lives in a place where there are very few people that speak the language they're trying to learn, which makes it incredibly difficult to find people to communicate with. There are also platforms that are trying to connect speakers, but from the research that I've done looking into such platforms for my own teaching, it's very difficult to find tenable relationships where speakers feel comfortable to speak in a second language and to make mistakes and to struggle with communication. Here I would like to talk about some examples. In Korea, Given Lee and Amanda Wallace set up a foreign language or English as a foreign language program where they used blended learning in their curriculum. And what they found was that most of the students found it very useful to be able to have the online component for having extra exercises and doing mock quizzes and tests. This was especially helpful for them in that they were required to take very specific tests at the end of the year, and the online component of the courses was geared towards helping them succeed on those tests. Now, if we think about the oral communication aspect of this, which they don't speak about specifically, it becomes a little more problematic to say that these online